Can MAGA stop the bleeding? Can they pause this ongoing civil war, or is it just about to get worse? Right, that's what you've got many asking right now as conservative and right-wing figures continue to go after one another, and now you've got people like Candace Owens fully entering the fight. And while this has been bubbling like we talked about yesterday, the main issue kicking things off was Tucker Carlson interviewing the white nationalist Groyper leader, Nick Fuentes. Right, because while you had many defending Tucker's choice, you also had many others, including Ben Shapiro, arguing that by platforming Nick Fuentes, Tucker was not only platforming anti-Semitism and other hateful ideologies, but engaging in those conversations himself. And then Ben also brought up the fact that Tucker previously interviewed Candace Owens, who also platformed Nick and has been criticized for spreading anti-Semitism and other conspiracies. Though to say that Candace Owens and Nick Fuentes are the best of friends, that would be, let's say, short-sighted, if not just outright wrong. Well, now Candace has responded, but not just because Ben Shapiro brought up her name, but because he brought up Charlie Kirk's name. And, since Charlie's death, Candace has spent a lot of time discussing the investigation, suggesting that there are truths to uncover that we don't really know about, and also alleging that he was facing threats over his changing views on Israel. Right? And this is another major point of contention that we've seen, many involved denying this, but she also talks about it a lot on her podcast, people agreeing with her. But for Ben Shapiro's part, he mentioned Charlie because Charlie and Nick Fuentes, they were very much at odds with one another, and so Ben argued that Tucker actually betrayed Charlie and his legacy by having Nick Fuentes on his show.
Now, Tucker Carlson has seen fit to launder Nick Fuentes, the person who hated Charlie most and who wished him destruction. That's not an act of friendship, it's an act of sick evil.
Right, and then you had Owens not happy with Ben for saying that.
They've decided posthumously that Tucker Carlson was a bad friend to Charlie Kirk. And do you know who can actually debunk that pretty easily? Yours truly. I got you guys, okay? And it's just a little bit of common sense. Before Charlie died, really kind of just before he died in July, I interviewed Nick Fuentes. And Charlie and I discussed the interview. And never once did he tell me not to speak to Nick Fuentes. Never once did he consider it an act of betrayal. Never at any point did Charlie say, don't do that, because that's ridiculous. It's not who he was. What I will not allow is this absolute inversion of reality where Ben Shapiro becomes any sort of voice on who is and who is not betraying their friendship with Charlie.
Right, so Candace's comments, they bring more and more attention to this whole situation, which I will say has been getting more coverage in many mainstream news outlets. Where you had MSNBC putting out a piece declaring that Nick Fuentes is winning the MAGA civil war. Also over the weekend, you had The Atlantic writing, Fuentes said he wants to drag the Republican Party kicking and screaming into the future, into the right wing, into a truly reactionary party, and saying his vision is coming true. The gap between Fuentes and the rest of the right is narrower than it has ever been. And you even had a New York Times piece going as far as to declare him Charlie Kirk's successor, saying plenty of conservatives, especially Jewish ones, abhor Fuentes' growing clout. But by cheering on Donald Trump as he promoted conspiracy theories and systematically destroyed bulwarks against nativism and bigotry in the Republican Party, they helped make Fuentes' rise possible. Also, regarding the New York Times, who took this picture? What was the lighting? Is there a filter on it? These are just questions I have personally because I have never seen as good of a photo of Nick Fuentes as what the New York Times put out. I consume a lot of right-wing media to stay in the know, to do this job. These look like two different people. It's like the New York Times went out of their way to try to make him look like James Dean. But that aside, even though you have outlets and a number of people thinking that Fuentes is winning by, getting this airtime, getting into more mainstream MAGA spaces, that doesn't also mean that for a sizable chunk of the Republican Party that they don't view him as fully toxic and radioactive. And so you've seen a ton of Republicans trying to distance themselves from not only him, but Tucker Carlson, denouncing anti-Semitism. But then also an interesting aspect of this is, well, some do think that MAGA does actually need to have this civil war. They're also looking at the calendar and saying, hey, can we put a pin in it? So all of my Republican friends with large followings, can we please refrain from infighting for just 2 days? Let's do all we can to win on Tuesday. Then you can all go back to fighting each other. As well as, why are so many conservative pundits focused on infighting and e-drama instead of key elections? Really makes you think. The regarding elections and voting, for her part, you had Candace Owens writing, not voting until we learn the truth about who killed Charlie, not lifting one finger.